Paving the Way to Healing and Recovery is the title of a conference held in Brooklyn earlier this month, hosted by Achievement First, Brooklyn High School, and two longtime local activist groups who are here to share the work they're doing to help the same young people we just heard President Obama speak about.
Danielle Sared, the Director of Common Justice, a project of the Vera Institute, which provides victim services and incarceration alternative programs in Brooklyn. Welcome. And Donnell Penny is the Assistant Coordinator at Common Justice. Welcome to you.
Thank you.
And we want to welcome back Kenton Kirby, the Men's Empowerment Coordinator at the Crown Heights Community Mediation Center, which operates a therapeutic program called Make It Happen. Thank you all for joining us on BK Live today.
Thank you.
Thanks.
So let's piggyback off of President Obama's speech, my brother's keeper. Now, don't jump on me when I ask this question, because last time I asked it, I got kind of whooped. But what is it missing?
So I think I'm aware we're having this conversation in the middle of the national attention to what's going on in Baltimore and around the country. And I think one of the questions that has arisen for us in that context is the same one that I would ask about My Brother's Keeper initiatives. And that's a question that haunted me, especially right after the grand jury decision about Eric Garner came through in New York, which happened the same week we released an issue brief about young men of color harmed by crime. And the question that haunted me then and hasn't left is, what would we have done if they had survived? So what if Freddie Gray were paralyzed from the waist down? What if Mike Brown were injured but still with us? What if Eric Garner had increased asthma symptoms as a result of his trauma? Like, what would we have done for these men? And the truth is, and we know this from our experience and from really extensive research, is that in all likelihood we wouldn't have done anything. Because while young men of color are among the people most likely to be hurt by violence in this country, they are hands down those least likely to get any kind of formal support. And as a country, we have failed miserably to deliver on the promise of racial equity in victim services, particularly when it comes to tending to the trauma and pain that young men survive.
So what can we do, or My Brother's Keeper do, to improve on those failures for these victims?
I feel it's important to, it's a wonderful idea. Now it has to be rolled out, and there needs to be a game plan. And that game plan can vary from city to city and state to state. So what's needed in New York may not be what's needed in Baltimore, may not be what's needed in Chicago. So it's very important for stakeholders in these different communities to really invest and focus on young men of color as victims and not as criminals, and figure out how best to serve them.
So follow-up question, what can each of you, will go around the table, tell us about your organizations and their missions as it relates to helping these victims? Or just helping these men? Do you want to start?
Sure. So Common Justice had entered into this conversation by asking the question, what would it look like to build a criminal justice system in which the greatest possible portion of victims experience a sense of justice and healing when they engage law enforcement? Right? It seems like a question, it seems like nonpartisan, straightforward, supportive, but it's not a question we've contended with as a country. And what we realized in answering that question is that we would have to tend to the pain of young men of color, who are the people most likely to be robbed or assaulted here in Brooklyn, in New York, and around the country. And so part of our commitment at Common Justice is to develop victim services that are responsive to the needs and experiences of young men of color when they're harmed. We want those services to be as available, as robust, and as good as the services that are available to me if I'm hurt. And we understand that situating those services in a cultural context is complicated, right? We can't just sort of take out the Madonna quote and put in a Tupac quote and put a picture of Malcolm and Martin on the wall and pretend that we have fully grappled with the fact that each of us heals is rooted in who we are and where we're from. And so at Common Justice, we are in the business of trying to answer that question. And I'll leave it to Donnell to speak about the men's groups we run that are one of our attempts to get at that.
Well, let me ask you this, though, because I definitely want you to address that. But also, I think that being a victim, as in being robbed or assaulted, is one thing, but also witnessing it repeatedly kind of desensitizes you to what it is. Can you add that to the element too? Because that's what was kind of going through my head.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, like even me growing up in my neighborhood of Brooklyn, where I'm from here.
Where you from in Brooklyn? Now we want to know where you from in Brooklyn.
What neighborhood?
I'm from East New York. I was raised in Lafayette Gardens, not too far down. But basically, yeah, I've witnessed a lot of things where it hasn't personally happened to me physically, but it happened to me to the point mentally where I see those things.
Right.
You know, and it does affect you. It's not just the person who gets hurt, it's the people around as well, the community.
Right.
Right? So, yeah, it does affect you, and it affects me to the point that now I'm trying to right some of the things, or I wouldn't even say right, because you can't really turn back the hands of time.
Right.
You know, but you can try to make it better.
Right.
And that's what I want to do. I don't want the next young boy to go through what I went through and see the things I had to see as a little boy playing on the playground. You know?
And I would also look at it as a sense of, like, our program, Make It Happen, deals with trauma with young men, but also kind of challenges their own definitions of what is healthy black masculinity. And a lot of times, that definition of masculinity is intertwined in trauma history. A lot of things like you're supposed to be a certain way as a man. You live in these communities, you see some violence, it's supposed to rub off on you. If you can't show any weakness. So in our program, we challenge that. And we try to create a space for these young men to understand it. You know, it's okay. It's not just anger. Anger is what we're seeing. We're seeing you lash out. We're seeing that. But there's some stuff under that we're not seeing. That's that shame. That's the guilt. That's embarrassment. Those are feelings and emotions that young men are told not to show off. So it's almost like I like to compare it like to a duck swimming on the lake. Over on the surface, it's very calm, but right under that water, those legs are kicking like crazy to make it make it survive. So that's how the work that we do in our programming. It's a challenge. We're not perfect at it, but you know, this is the work that we're doing.
And it's the same move, which is men opposing violence everywhere. The men's group, and it's the same thing. Them thinking about what the definition of a man. You know, like how we have these definitions that we grow up with. And like you were saying, the things that we learn, this is what a man is supposed to be. This is what a woman's supposed to be. And breaking them out of that, like, no, there's other options. You know?
I agree with you. And what kind of comes to me is someone that I interviewed a long time ago, we were talking about violence. We had our little conversation off camera, and he said to me, you have a choice. You're either the predator or you're the prey. So you have to make a decision. So that's a lot to have to understand, and I feel like that speaks to the trauma that they've experienced.
And the other thing too is one thing that we know about trauma is that it heightens our sense that we are in danger beyond what's true, right? So even when we've had smallish things happen to us, we get jumpy, right? Like we're more reactive. And how that intersects with people who are living in a circumstance where they are faced with daily threats. Like, what does it mean if your sense of danger is elevated in a place where there is a real danger? And so many people who are initiating violence, or what appears to be initiating violence, are often acting out of a place of trauma and pain and what, you know, in the field we call hypervigilance. That doesn't excuse the harm they cause, right? Like nothing we survive gives us permission to hurt someone else. So it doesn't get them off the hook, but it does put us on the hook. It begs the question of where were we when they were hurt? Did we or didn't we show up? Did we or didn't we do our part to help them heal? And so while they remain accountable for whatever decisions they make out of that pain, we are also accountable for the degree to which we have and haven't met them in those times of pain with the resources they need and deserve to heal.
And I think it's important to also look at it as this. People are, these young men in these communities, baseline, they're trying to stay safe. You're not making a decision because you're a quote unquote bad person.
Right.
These are decisions you're making to stay safe. They're maladaptive because obviously there are consequences and everything, but our baseline is to try to stay safe, and we all do it differently.
Right.
I mean, there's some people that are hypervigilant. That's in the big trauma world, right? People that say, oh, I heard that gunshot, this person got shot. It's nothing. That's numbing. That's numbing. That's a traumatic response.
Right.
So we see it day in and day out in different ways, but the baseline is people are trying to stay safe out there.
And that's what my father, like I was talking about at the conference, about how my father always told me don't cry as a little boy when I fell. And then I felt that I had to say it wasn't because he didn't love me, you know, because I felt like I had to correct that. He did that because he felt that's how a man of color survived. He had to hide those feelings. He had to be tough. He had to be this person.
Right.
So in his way, that was love, because he was, in his way, that's how he knew to survive himself. You know, and to this day, that's how he continues to survive and be the person he is. So like when you were saying, we don't do it because we're bad, we do it because we survive. Yeah, it's really a survival thing. I go chill with this crowd of people because I know I'm safer over here, even though they're bad, but they're not going to hurt me if I'm with them.
Right.
You know?
Right.
Yeah. So given this current wave of conflict, trauma, and riots, Danielle, you kind of referred to it, not just in Brooklyn and New York, but all over the country, obviously. What is needed for communities to recover from this trauma? Does anyone want to start? And what are you organizing? I know, Danielle, what are you doing with your organization to kind of help people recover from the trauma? Because there's a perception of these communities and what they're going through, and then there's a reality, and you're dealing with the reality.
I mean, I think one of the things we have to do all the time is stop pretending things are new. And so we tend to deal with things in this country without a historical context, without a cultural context, without an understanding of what else is going around and before a specific incident. And so at Common Justice, like, we are not in the business of kind of direct response to the immediate aftermath of the kind of violence that we're seeing in Baltimore. But what we do know is that we have to deal with pain as it arises, right? We have to have a commitment that says anytime someone is hurt, anytime someone is a victim of crime, that is going to be important to us. It's going to be important to us not just as small organizations on the ground, but it's going to be important to us as a country. And we're going to do what we do as a country when we take something seriously, which is we're going to put resources behind it. Right? And it's part of why My Brother's Keeper holds some real promise, because it includes a sense of saying, like, we have to put resources behind it. And in some ways, that is how we as a society convey that something matters to us. So when I was sexually assaulted as a teenager, as a white woman, there were resources for me everywhere, right? There were rape crisis centers, there were programs, there were all these things. I didn't actually avail myself of any of those things. But the fact that they existed communicated to me that what happened to me was wrong, that my pain mattered, that my life mattered to my society, and that it was of enough importance that my society would put resources behind making sure that I healed through it. The fact that that was communicated to me was a huge part of my healing process, right? It enabled my healing process even if I never set foot in any of those specific programs. And so what we have done, we have sent as clear a message as a country about the pain young men of color experience, but the message we have sent is the exact opposite. So the lack of services, the lack of infrastructure, the lack of resources is one of the ways we convey that their lives and their pain don't matter. And we have to fix that. And we have to have that present with us in the broad and historical sense, even as we deal with the specific incidents where these things reach a boiling point.
Right. Now we're running out of time. We have about a minute left, so some last words from this side of the table, please.
Yeah. And where can we find out more about your organizations? But go ahead.
Okay, to piggyback very briefly. The resources need to come, right? But until then, the work that we do at Make It Happen is trying to equip our young men to navigate the world that they're currently living in with the obstacles that they face. And also try not to normalize things like, oh, you walk into a group and you get stopped and frisked. Let's talk about that experience. So if that happens, and my young men's experiences trump anything that I have planned. So if they come in with something, we deal with it, because we don't want to normalize that.
Got it.
Now, our program, you can find us on the crownheights.org website.
Okay.
It's called Make It Happen. We can find us on Make It Happen Instagram, Make It Happen BK.
Okay. Thank you for that. No, we will need to have you guys back, because then I want to talk about how the media plays into all this. No, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for coming
We
on to talk about
appreciate
your
it.
organizations. We really appreciate it. Thank you very much.